What
The
on
sirens
earth are
weren't
you doing?
supposed to
This
be
is
for me.
outrageous.
Just fishing here,
They
ma'am.
never
No
are,
harm done.
until
No
they
harm,
are.
people could get hurt.
I was standing knee-deep at the edge of the lake, line cast, morning mist lifting like a curtain, when a patrol car screeched onto the gravel road behind me. Not one. Two. Lights flashing red and blue across water so clear it mirrored the sky. I remember thinking, this can't be real, because 5 minutes earlier the only sound was birds and the soft click of my reel. Now someone was shouting, and a woman in designer sunglasses was pointing at me like I'd committed a felony. She was HOA. And she was furious. She screamed that I was trespassing, stealing, destroying community property. She told the officers I was a stranger, a menace, someone who needed to be removed immediately. Her voice echoed across the lake as if the water itself was listening. I stayed calm, because panic never helps when you know a truth others don't. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that this lake wasn't community property at all. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the HOA's. It was mine. Every acre. Every drop. An $8.2 million body of water they'd been advertising for years like a shared dream. The officers approached cautiously, hands resting near their belts, eyes shifting between me and the woman. One asked for my ID. I handed it over without a word. The woman smirked, already tasting victory, already rehearsing the story she'd tell her neighbors about how she handled the problem. I could feel it building, that moment right before a lie collapses. The wind picked up, rippling the surface of the lake, and I thought about paperwork, signatures, and the quiet deal that had transferred ownership long before the subdivision even existed. When the officer radioed in my name, his posture changed. Not dramatically. Subtly. The kind of shift you only notice if you're paying attention. He looked back at the lake, then at me, then at the woman. He asked one more question, slow and deliberate, a question that would turn the entire morning upside down. "Sir," he said, "do you happen to be the registered owner of this property?" Behind us, neighbors gathered, phones raised, whispers spreading faster than the sirens. The woman's confidence cracked, just for a second, and in that second I knew the truth would land hard. This wasn't just about fishing. It was about power, paperwork, and a mistake they'd regret forever. It would expose secrets, trigger lawsuits, and rewrite who truly belonged here, once the badge camera kept rolling. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, because the truth doesn't need decoration. And that's when everything began to unravel. The woman laughed when I nodded. Not a nervous laugh. A sharp, dismissive one, the kind people use when they're sure they've already won. She crossed her arms and told the officers I was lying, that trespassers always claimed ownership once they got caught. She even suggested they arrest me before I ran. I stayed exactly where I was, fishing rod still in hand, because confidence backed by facts is a quiet thing. The officers didn't move to cuff me. Instead, one of them asked her to step back. That's when the tone shifted. The senior officer walked a few steps away, radio pressed to his shoulder, speaking in a low voice. I could hear fragments. Parcel number. Deed records. County registry. The words didn't mean much to the crowd gathering behind us, but they meant everything to me. I'd heard them before, sitting in a title office months earlier, signing documents while the seller explained how the lake had been assumed to be communal for years without anyone actually verifying ownership. An assumption worth millions. The woman kept talking, filling the silence with accusations. She named HOA bylaws, fines, rules about fishing hours and resident access. She said she was authorized to enforce them. One officer finally held up a hand and told her, calmly, to stop. That only made her louder. Phones were out now. Someone whispered that this was going on Facebook Live. Another neighbor said they'd always wondered who really owned the lake. You could feel the curiosity spreading like electricity. The officer returned, eyes serious. He asked me if I had proof of ownership. I told him it was on file with the county, but I also had a digital copy if he wanted to see it. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder I'd saved months ago, and handed it over. He scrolled slowly, carefully. The woman leaned in, trying to see, her expression shifting from smug to confused. "That doesn't mean anything," she snapped. "Our HOA manages the lake." "Managing isn't owning," the officer said quietly, a single sentence that landed heavier than a shout. He asked dispatch to confirm the deed. While we waited, the lake seemed to hold its breath. The breeze died down. Even the birds went quiet. I could feel eyes on me, judging, reassessing, recalculating who I was in their story. When the confirmation came through, it was unmistakable. The lake, the shoreline, the access road, all of it, was registered under my name. Purchased legally. Recorded properly. Valued at $8.2 million. The officer handed my phone back with a nod of respect. Then he turned to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, "this gentleman is not trespassing. He is fishing on his own property." The color drained from her face. Not embarrassment. Fear. Because in that moment, she realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake with consequences. And it was about to get much worse. The silence after the officer's statement was louder than the sirens had been. No one spoke. No one moved. The woman from the HOA stared at the water like it had betrayed her personally. Around us, neighbors lowered their phones, suddenly unsure if they were witnessing drama or history. I could feel the shift, that moment when a crowd realizes they were wrong about someone, and now they don't know where to place their eyes. The officer cleared his throat and asked the woman for her identification. She hesitated, then handed it over with shaking fingers. Her confidence was gone, replaced by tight breaths and darting glances. She tried to explain, talking too fast, saying the HOA had always controlled the lake, that residents paid fees, that signs had been posted for years. The officer listened patiently, then explained something that hit harder than any accusation. Control without ownership doesn't create rights. It creates liability. That word spread through the group like a chill. Liability. Someone whispered it. Someone else repeated it. A man near the dock muttered that the HOA had been collecting lake maintenance fees for over a decade. Another neighbor asked, out loud, where that money had gone if the lake was never theirs to begin with. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. The officer asked me if I wanted to file a complaint for harassment or false reporting. I looked at the woman, then at the crowd, then back at the lake. I said not yet. That answer surprised everyone, including the officer. But this wasn't about revenge in the moment. This was bigger. Paper trails don't disappear just because someone panics. They sit quietly, waiting to be followed. The woman suddenly tried a different approach. Her voice softened. She apologized. She said there must have been a misunderstanding and suggested we talk it out privately. The officer shut that down immediately. He informed her that making a false police report was a serious matter, especially when used to intimidate someone on their own property. Her face flushed deep red as he explained that the incident would be documented. As the patrol cars prepared to leave, the officer turned to me and asked one final question. "Sir, would you like us to stay while you continue fishing?" A few people gasped. I nodded. The officer smiled, just slightly. I cast my line again, the splash echoing across the lake. Behind me, the HOA's authority collapsed in real time. And this was only the beginning. The patrol cars didn't leave right away. They stayed parked near the water, engines idling, as if even the officers understood this moment needed witnesses. I reeled in slowly, not because I cared about the fish anymore, but because every movement now felt symbolic. Behind me, The HOA woman paced back and forth, phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently. Whatever confidence she had left was dissolving with every step. Neighbors began asking questions. Not to her, but to me. Polite ones at first. How long had I owned the lake? Why hadn't anyone known? Was this some kind of legal trick? I answered calmly. I explained that the land had been part of a larger estate, sold quietly when the original owner passed away. The HOA had been built later, assuming the lake was included because no one ever challenged it. Assumptions, I reminded them, are expensive. Someone asked about the value. When I said $8.2 million, the crowd reacted instantly. Gasps. Shaking heads. A few people laughed in disbelief. One man muttered that his HOA fees suddenly made a lot more sense, and not in a good way. A woman near the dock asked if that meant the HOA had no right to restrict access, host events, or fine residents for lake use. I told her the truth. None of that was authorized without my permission. The HOA woman finally hung up her phone and approached again, this time flanked by a man I assumed was another board member. He tried to sound reasonable, talking about partnerships and shared use agreements. He suggested the lake had become part of the community identity. I listened, then reminded him that identity doesn't replace ownership. The officer nearby nodded slightly, as if underlining the point. That's when the realization spread. This wasn't a single embarrassing incident. This was a structural failure. Years of rules, fines, marketing materials, even property values, all built on something they never owned. I could see it in their faces. Panic mixed with calculation. Who approved this? Who signed off on the budgets? Who knew and stayed quiet? A neighbor asked me what I planned to do next. I told them the truth. I planned to go home, review my options, and let the law handle the rest. That answer unsettled them more than anger would have. Because calm means preparation. As the sun climbed higher, the lake sparkled innocently, untouched by the chaos it had caused. I packed up my gear, thanked the officers, and walked away knowing the story was far from over. The real consequences were just beginning. That afternoon, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Not peaceful, just unsettled, like a place that had learned an uncomfortable truth and didn't know how to sit with it yet. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing. Missed calls. Voicemails. Emails from numbers and addresses I didn't recognize. Word had spread faster than I expected, and now everyone wanted something. Clarification. Permission. Reassurance. Damage control. The first voicemail was from the HOA president. Not the woman from the lake, but the actual head of the board. His tone was overly polite, the kind people use when they're trying to sound calm while standing on a fault line. He said they wanted to clear up the confusion and requested a meeting as soon as possible. I didn't call back. Not yet. When people rush to meet, it's usually because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Later that evening, a neighbor knocked on my door. He introduced himself, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes uneasy. He apologized for how things had gone down that morning and admitted that many residents had questioned the lake ownership over the years but were always told the paperwork was handled. He asked me if their homes would be affected. That question mattered. I told him the truth. I didn't own their houses. I owned the lake. What happened next depended on how the HOA chose to respond. By nightfall, social media had done what it always does. Clips from the incident were everywhere. The pointing. The police cars. The officer's calm explanation. Comment sections exploded with speculation and outrage. Some blamed the HOA. Some blamed the residents for never checking. A few tried to paint me as the villain, calling me secretive, greedy, opportunistic. I didn't respond. Silence is often the loudest statement. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA's legal counsel, requesting an immediate cease and desist against restricting community access to the lake. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I forwarded it to my attorney, along with the body cam footage links and screenshots from the HOA's own website advertising lake privileges. My attorney called me an hour later. His voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of excitement professionals get when a case is clean. He told me the HOA wasn't just wrong. They were exposed. Years of unauthorized use. Collected fees. Enforcement actions with no legal standing. Potential fraud. He asked me one question. How far do you want to take this? I looked out the window toward the distant shimmer of water and understood something clearly. This was no longer just about a lake. It was about accountability. The meeting request came 3 days later, officially scheduled, professionally worded, and impossible to ignore. The HOA board wanted to sit down, in good faith, to discuss a resolution. My attorney advised me to attend, not to negotiate, but to listen. When people believe they can still talk their way out, they reveal everything. The meeting room was packed. Every board member was there, along with 2 lawyers, a property manager, and the same woman who had called the police. She wouldn't look at me. The HOA president opened with a speech about community values, shared spaces, and misunderstandings. He spoke for 10 minutes without saying anything meaningful. Then their lawyer slid a proposal across the table. A long-term access agreement. Annual compensation. Shared liability. In simple terms, they wanted to keep using the lake like nothing had changed. My attorney didn't touch the paper. Instead, he asked a single question. Before we discuss the future, can you explain the past? The room stiffened. He asked who verified ownership when the HOA was formed. Silence. He asked who approved the collection of lake maintenance fees. More silence. He asked how much money had been collected over the years. No one answered. That's when the truth began to spill. One board member admitted they assumed the lake was included in the original development. Another said the documents were unclear. The property manager blamed a previous company. Everyone blamed someone who wasn't in the room. My attorney calmly laid out the consequences. Unauthorized use. Financial misrepresentation. False enforcement actions. Potential civil exposure. The words landed hard. The woman finally spoke. She said she was just enforcing the rules she was given. She said she didn't know. I believed her. But ignorance doesn't undo damage. It only explains how it happened. Then my attorney did something unexpected. He declined the agreement. He explained that access would be suspended immediately pending a full audit. No fishing events. No HOA signage. No community lake language. The lake would be treated like what it was. Private property. The reaction was immediate. Anger. Panic. Pleading. One board member warned that property values would drop. Another said residents would revolt. I stayed quiet until they finished. Then I spoke. I told them this situation existed because no one bothered to check the truth. I told them I wasn't interested in punishing residents, but I was interested in correcting a lie that had been sold for years. We stood up and left. No handshake. No agreement. Outside, the air felt lighter. Behind us, the HOA was left with paperwork, questions, and consequences they could no longer avoid. The lake didn't change. But everything around it did. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, quietly, through emails, notices, and uneasy conversations along the sidewalks near the water. The HOA suspended meetings. The website went offline. Signs around the lake were removed overnight, as if erasing them could undo years of certainty. Residents were confused, angry, scared. Some blamed the board. Some blamed me. Most blamed themselves for never asking the one question that mattered. My attorney began the audit. Bank records, invoices, vendor contracts, enforcement logs. The deeper we looked, the clearer it became. Lake maintenance fees had been collected annually, labeled vaguely, spent loosely. Some money went to landscaping. Some to administrative costs. None of it came with permission from the owner. Me. The numbers added up quickly, and not in the HOA's favor. Letters went out to residents explaining the situation in plain language. The lake was privately owned. Access was suspended temporarily. No one was being targeted. No one was being punished. Transparency mattered now. The reactions varied. A few people thanked me for finally forcing the truth into the open. Others accused me of ruining the neighborhood. One anonymous note taped to my mailbox called me selfish. I kept it. Proof always matters. Local news picked up the story. Not because of me, but because of the amount. $8.2 million tends to get attention. Reporters asked how something like this could happen. The answer was simple. Assumptions, repeated long enough, become facts in people's minds. Until paperwork shows up. The HOA's lawyers requested mediation. My attorney declined again. He explained that mediation assumes equal fault. This wasn't equal. This was documented. Meanwhile, residents began demanding refunds for years of lake-related fees. Board members resigned. One quietly moved away. Another hired separate counsel. The structure that once felt solid was collapsing under its own shortcuts. One evening, I walked the shoreline alone. No crowds. No shouting. Just water, reflecting the sky like it always had. I realized then that this lake had never belonged to a community in practice. It belonged to whoever respected the truth. Ownership wasn't power. It was responsibility. And I intended to use it carefully. The next step would define everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who lived near this water. What I chose to do next would decide whether the story ended in anger, or something better. Change was inevitable. The lake had forced honesty into a system built on comfort. I wasn't looking for victory. I was looking for resolution. But resolution requires choices, and choices have consequences. Soon, those consequences would surface in courtrooms, bank statements, and quiet conversations that would reshape the neighborhood forever. Nothing would be the same, and everyone would have to live with the truth. Court didn't look like television. No shouting. No dramatic reveals. Just folders, timelines, and people forced to answer questions they had avoided for years. The HOA's legal strategy collapsed quickly, not because they lacked arguments, but because they lacked facts. Deeds don't care about intentions. Records don't bend to tradition. Every document pointed to the same conclusion: the lake was never theirs to control. Residents filled the benches during the hearings. Some came out of anger. Others out of fear. A few out of curiosity. I watched familiar faces realize, slowly, that the rules they'd lived under were built on nothing more than repetition. Witnesses testified about collected fees, fines issued to residents, even access restrictions enforced aggressively. Each statement added weight. Each answer tightened the knot. Then came the financial breakdown. Years of lake-related fees totaled into the hundreds of thousands. Money taken in good faith by residents, spent without authority by the HOA. The judge's questions were calm but surgical. Who approved this? Who verified ownership? Who benefited? Silence answered most of them. The HOA's attempt to shift blame failed. Past boards. Former management companies. Missing records. None of it mattered. Responsibility didn't disappear just because it changed hands. When the ruling came, it was decisive. Unauthorized use confirmed. Fee collection improper. Enforcement actions invalid. The HOA was ordered to stop all lake-related activity immediately and establish a restitution fund for residents. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Microphones pushed forward. I kept my statement short. This was never about taking something away. It was about correcting a mistake and preventing it from continuing. That answer didn't satisfy everyone, but it didn't need to. Truth doesn't negotiate. Back home, the neighborhood felt quieter again, but this time different from before. Not tense. Reflective. Some residents waved. Others avoided eye contact. A few stopped to talk, to ask questions, to apologize for assuming the worst. I listened. Healing doesn't happen through silence alone. My attorney asked what I wanted to do next. The lake was mine, fully recognized, fully protected. I had options. Restrict access permanently. Sell. Develop. License use. Each path carried consequences, not just financial, but human. I took time to think, walking the shoreline again, watching the water move without caring who owned it. I realized something important. The lake didn't cause this conflict. People did. Systems did. Shortcuts did. And now there was a chance to rebuild something better, based on truth instead of assumption. The final decision would define how this story ended, not just legally, but morally. And that ending was coming fast. The final choice wasn't announced with a press release or a crowd. It happened quietly, the way meaningful decisions usually do. I invited the residents to a meeting, not as an HOA event, but as neighbors. No board. No authority. Just honesty. I explained the ruling, the ownership, and the options on the table. Then I told them my decision. The lake would remain private property, but it would not be closed. I offered a licensed access agreement, transparent, affordable, and clearly defined. No fines. No intimidation. No assumptions. Fishing days scheduled openly. Maintenance handled legally. Liability addressed properly. Every term written in plain language, reviewed by independent counsel. If they accepted, the lake could become what they always believed it was, without the lie underneath. The reaction surprised me. People didn't cheer. They exhaled. Some smiled. Some cried. A few stood up and apologized publicly for how they had treated me. I told them apologies weren't necessary, but awareness was. This wasn't about me winning. It was about everyone learning. Over the following months, the neighborhood stabilized. Property values recovered. Trust, slowly, began to rebuild. The HOA restructured under stricter oversight, stripped of unchecked authority. Residents asked more questions. Read documents. Verified claims. The lake became a symbol, not of entitlement, but of accountability. Sometimes I still fish there early in the morning, alone. The water looks the same as it always has. Calm. Indifferent. Honest. It reminds me how easily people accept stories that benefit them, and how violently they resist truth when it interrupts comfort. But it also reminds me that correction is possible, if someone is willing to stand still when accused. That day the HOA called the cops thinking power would protect them. Instead, paperwork did. A badge didn't save the truth. Records did. And a lake worth $8.2 million taught an entire neighborhood a lesson they'll never forget. Ownership isn't about control. It's about responsibility, transparency, and the courage to verify what everyone else assumes. So if there's one thing this story proves, it's this. Never assume authority equals truth. Never confuse tradition with legality. And never underestimate how fast a lie collapses when the truth calmly shows up with documentation. Because sometimes, the biggest catch of the day isn't a fish. It's the moment reality finally pulls the line tight. That realization, more than money, is what truly changed everything forever here.